The alarm lights washed the lobby in pulses of amber and red. Nobody spoke for a second. Then every phone in the room started vibrating at once. The sound rolled through the marble lobby like trapped bees. One of the board members looked down at his screen and cursed under his breath. Another moved quickly toward the concierge desk. Richard did not. He stayed perfectly still beside the spill on the floor. That was strange. Most people panicked when flood alarms hit Bay Ridge Point. Especially after what happened 3 years earlier. But Richard only adjusted the cuff of his white jacket and looked at me again. "Turn the alarms off," he said. I stared at him. Rain hammered the glass harder now. The water line near the elevator had widened into a thin dark ribbon. "The west valve is failing," I said quietly. "Then fix it," Richard replied. His voice sharpened this time. "That is what maintenance is for." Behind him, the digital board changed again. Marina level rising. Lower garage warning. The concierge inhaled sharply. One of the residents near the coffee station grabbed her purse and hurried toward the elevators. Another man stepped away from the windows and muttered something about moving his car. I clipped my access card back onto my belt. The cracked edge bent slightly in my fingers. Richard noticed it. His eyes flicked down for half a second. Tiny detail. But I caught it. He knew exactly what he had stepped on. Daniel Reeves arrived 30 seconds later. Dark suit. Silver tie. Tablet in hand. He moved fast through the lobby, stopping near the board members. "The marina pumps are not responding," he said. "The lower dock sensors just went offline." The room tightened. I could feel it. Like air pressure before lightning. Daniel finally looked at me. Then at the wet floor. Then at Richard. His jaw shifted slightly. He understood faster than the others. Richard folded his arms. "Then perhaps our maintenance staff should stop standing around." Daniel did not answer him immediately. His eyes dropped to my access badge again. "Maya," he said carefully, "did you already inspect the West Utility Tunnel?" "Not yet," I replied. I was stopped in the lobby. Silence. Small silence. Dangerous silence. Richard turned toward Daniel with a smile that looked practiced. "Surely there are backup teams for this." Daniel glanced toward the flashing marina alert. "There are backups for electrical systems," he said. "Not for manual floodgate override." The words landed heavier than he intended. A woman near the elevators whispered, "What does that mean?" Nobody answered her. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay. The glass windows trembled faintly. I could already picture the lower tunnel in my head. Concrete walls. Salt smell. Rusted manual will valves. Standing water around the drain channels. If the west gate jammed completely during high tide, seawater would push straight into the underground parking levels. Hundreds of luxury vehicles sat 2 floors below us. But cars were not the real problem. The electrical relay room was down there too. Richard walked closer to me again. Too close. "Then go downstairs," he said quietly. "Unless cleaning floors is your limit." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Another mistake. Richard still thought this was about humiliation. He did not understand the building was balancing on a knife edge now. I stepped around the spill without answering him. The service hallway doors swung open as I moved toward the utility corridor. The smell changed immediately. Less perfume. More bleach. More metal. The hum of generators vibrated faintly beneath the floor. Daniel followed me. I heard his dress shoes behind my work boots. "Maya," he said under his breath, "how bad is it?" I kept walking. Fluorescent lights flickered above us. Somewhere deep below, pipes groaned. "If the gate motor locks," I said, "water hits the relay room in under 20 minutes. Daniel slowed. His face lost color. 20. Maybe less. He looked back toward the lobby. Toward the board meeting upstairs. Toward Richard. Then he lowered his voice further. You saw the override transfer paperwork too, did not you? I stopped walking. Just for a second. Cold air drifted through the corridor vents. Why is Richard moving Marina Control Authority? I asked. Daniel did not answer right away. That told me enough. Then the building lights dimmed once. The overhead lights flickered twice before the backup generators caught. A low mechanical hum rolled through the walls. Daniel looked up immediately. That should not happen, he said. The fluorescent lights above us steadied again, but weaker now. Pale. Sickly. I kept walking toward the utility stairwell. The concrete floor vibrated faintly under my boots. Somewhere below us, water slammed against metal. That sound made my stomach tighten. We reached the gray steel security door leading downstairs. I pressed my access card against the scanner. The machine beeped red. Once. Then again. Daniel exhaled sharply. I tried a second time. The cracked edge scraped inside the reader. Red light again. Damn it, I whispered. Daniel stepped closer. Can you override it manually? Not from here. Rain hammered the building above us. Hard enough to hear through concrete. The emergency lights along the hallway blinked amber now. Slower than before. Daniel rubbed one hand across his mouth. How long before the lower level floods? Depends whether the west gate fully locked. Best case. 15 minutes. He looked toward the dead scanner again. Then toward me. His voice dropped lower. Richard signed the marina transfer this morning. I stared at him. Without a board vote? Daniel nodded once. He moved temporary authority to Harbor Atlantic Development. Cold air pushed through the stairwell vents. Harbor Atlantic. I knew the name. Everybody around the bay knew it. Luxury expansion company. Expensive advertisements. Bigger docks. Bigger towers. Bigger profits. They had been trying to buy shoreline control around Bay Ridge Point for almost 2 years. The scanner beeped again under my hand. Still red. Daniel looked nervous now. Actually nervous. Not executive nervous. Human nervous. Maya, he said quietly, if the marina floods tonight while the transfer is active, Harbor Atlantic gets emergency infrastructure control. I looked at him fully then. Finally the shape of it appeared. Not an accident. Not bad timing. Leverage. The storm. The failing floodgate. The transfer paperwork. Richard stepping on my access badge right before the alarms triggered. My pulse slowed. Instead of rising. That always happened when things got dangerous. The details became clearer. Sharper. Daniel saw it in my face. You understand now? Yeah, I said softly. I do. Another loud metallic groan echoed below us. The pipes shuddered hard enough to rattle the stairwell railings. Then came a deep hydraulic thump. Wrong rhythm. Wrong pressure. I moved fast toward the emergency maintenance cabinet mounted beside the door. The metal handle stuck at first. Then opened with a sharp squeal. Inside hung old mechanical keys attached to faded red tags. Most people in the building did not even know those keys existed anymore. I grabbed the lower utility bypass key. Daniel blinked. You still know the old system? The old system works when rich people break the new one. He almost smiled at that. Almost. We pushed through the emergency stairwell together. The smell hit immediately. Salt water. Oil. Wet concrete. The lower we descended, the louder the building became. Pipes knocking. Pumps whining. Water moving somewhere it should not move. The emergency lights painted the walls in dull orange bands. Daniel struggled to keep pace in his dress shoes. Halfway down, his phone vibrated. He checked the screen and stopped walking. His face tightened instantly. "What?" I asked. He looked up slowly. "Richard just authorized full resident evacuation for the marina towers." My boots stopped on the concrete step. "Already?" Daniel nodded. "He is moving too fast." That confirmed it. Evacuation meant panic. Panic meant emergency authority. Emergency authority meant Harbor Atlantic could step in before sunrise. Daniel lowered the phone. "He is using the storm." Thunder cracked above us. Loud enough to shake dust loose from the ceiling pipes. Then the emergency lights dimmed again. This time they stayed dim. We finally reached the lower utility corridor. Water rushed beneath the metal floor grates in dark streams. The air was colder down here. Much colder. A red warning light spun slowly above the west pump chamber door. I moved toward it quickly. Then I froze. The chamber lock had already been opened. The red warning light spun slowly across the flooded corridor walls. Water hissed beneath the metal grates near my boots. Daniel stopped beside me and stared at the chamber door. The heavy lock hung open against the steel handle. Fresh scratches cut across the metal. Somebody had gotten here first. A cold draft pushed through the chamber seam. I could hear the west pump straining behind it. The sound came in uneven bursts now. Too much pressure. Too little release. "Who else has access down here?" Daniel asked quietly. I crouched beside the lock. My fingers brushed the wet steel. Still cold from the hallway air. Not warm enough for recent maintenance work. "Not many people," I said. "Security supervisors. Senior facilities staff. Richard." Daniel's expression tightened immediately. Thunder rolled above us again. This time the lights flickered hard enough to black out for half a second. In the darkness, the sound of rushing water grew louder. Bigger. Alive. Then the emergency lights snapped back on. Orange reflections shook across the wet floor. I stood and pushed open the chamber door. Humid air hit my face instantly. The pump room stretched below us in rows of pipes and concrete channels. Massive steel valves lined the walls like submarine machinery. Water churned through the lower trench at dangerous speed now. The smell of salt and machine oil burned the back of my throat. Then I saw the west gate control panel. My stomach dropped. The override lever had been jammed halfway between manual and automatic control. Deliberately. Daniel stepped beside me. "Can that happen by accident?" "No," I moved quickly toward the panel. My boots splashed through shallow water gathering across the floor. The generator lights above us buzzed weakly. One of the pumps coughed hard. Then stuttered. Wrong rhythm again. I grabbed the override lever and tried to force it downward. It barely moved. Something inside the mechanism resisted. "It is stuck," Daniel said. "No," I answered. It was forced. Tiny metal fragments glittered near the base of the housing. Broken locking teeth. Somebody had damaged the gear assembly on purpose. Another alarm started beeping from the far side of the room. Faster this time. More urgent. Daniel checked his phone. Again. No signal. He turned in a slow circle beneath the dim lights. "The evacuation order just hit every resident phone," he said. "People are already leaving the upper towers." "Good," I muttered. "Because if this room fails, the lower parking decks flood first." He looked toward the concrete trench where seawater slammed against the pressure gate. "How bad?" I wiped water from my forehead with the back of my wrist. 8 feet in under 30 minutes if the barrier opens fully. Daniel went silent. I could almost hear him calculating the lawsuits. The insurance collapse. The emergency authority transfers. Harbor Atlantic stepping in before sunrise with cameras rolling and contracts ready. Another metallic bang echoed through the chamber. Louder now. One of the support pipes jerked violently against its wall brackets. I turned fast toward the pressure gauge. The needle had climbed deep into the red zone. That should not be possible, Daniel whispered. I already knew why it was happening. The overflow bypass valve was closed too tightly. Water pressure had nowhere to release. Somebody wanted the gate to fail dramatically. Fast enough to justify emergency control. Slow enough to avoid criminal sabotage charges. Smart sabotage. Corporate sabotage. I moved toward the manual valve near the trench edge. Rust covered most of the surface. The wheel had not been turned in years. Help me, I said. Daniel loosened his suit jacket and grabbed the opposite side. We pulled together. The wheel groaned loudly but barely shifted. Water sprayed through the pipe seams beside us. Ice-cold droplets hit my face and neck. The pump lights dimmed again. Then brightened. Then dimmed harder. Maya, Daniel said suddenly. Look. I followed his stare toward the upper catwalk above the chamber. A figure stood behind the safety railing for only a second. White shirt. Dark coat. Watching us. Then gone. My grip tightened on the rusted wheel. Somebody was still inside the system. The figure disappeared before Daniel could speak. Only the faint vibration of footsteps echoed across the upper catwalk. Then silence returned. Heavy silence. The kind that sat inside your chest. Water crashed through the trench below us in violent bursts. The pressure gauge needle twitched deeper into the red. I released the rusted valve slowly. Stay here, I said. Daniel looked at me like I had lost my mind. Absolutely not. Another loud bang shook the chamber walls. Dust drifted from the ceiling pipes. Somewhere above us, metal groaned under pressure. If somebody sabotaged this system, Daniel whispered, we should call security. And tell them what? I asked. That the head of the HOA may be helping Harbor Atlantic flood his own marina. Daniel opened his mouth. Then stopped. Exactly. Nobody upstairs would move without proof. Not against Richard Calloway. Not during a storm evacuation. I stepped toward the narrow staircase leading to the upper catwalk. Water splashed around my boots with every step. The emergency lights painted the steel railings orange and black. Behind me, Daniel exhaled hard and followed anyway. The catwalk shook slightly under our weight. Thin puddles spread across the grated floor. I could see the entire chamber from up there now. The pumps. The valves. The flooding trench. The failing control panel blinking red beside the west gate assembly. And near the far maintenance office, I saw the door standing half open. A faint strip of light spilled across the wet catwalk floor. Daniel saw it too. Somebody is in there. We moved carefully. The building hummed around us like a wounded machine. Every few seconds the lights dimmed again. The smell up there was different. Less salt water. More burned wiring. Hot plastic. My pulse slowed further. Tiny details sharpened around me. Wet footprints on the steel grates. Fresh ones. Expensive shoes. Not work boots. Not maintenance tread. Daniel noticed them too. Those are not from staff. We reached the office door. The old fluorescent lamp inside buzzed weakly overhead. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Maintenance maps covered the desk. And sitting beside the keyboard was a white linen jacket soaked dark at the sleeves. Richard. But the room was empty. Daniel stepped inside first. Where did he go? I did not answer immediately. My eyes fixed on the computer monitor instead. Live marina. Schematics glowed across the screen. Pressure readings. Flood projections. Emergency authority documents. And one active transfer approval already waiting for final confirmation. Harbor Atlantic Development. Temporary coastal infrastructure control. My stomach tightened. Richard had prepared everything before the storm even hit shore. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. This cannot be legal. It only has to survive tonight, I said quietly. Another sound echoed behind us. A metallic door slamming somewhere deeper inside the utility level. Daniel turned fast. He is still down here. I stepped toward the desk. The mouse cursor blinked over the final authorization box. One click away from transferring emergency control if the marina officially failed. Then I noticed something else. Smaller. More dangerous. The flood projections on the side panel had been altered manually. Somebody increased the expected damage estimates. Artificially. Enough to trigger federal emergency review by morning. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. His voice lowered. He is manufacturing a disaster. The lights flickered hard again. Then the chamber alarms changed tone completely. Higher now. Faster. My eyes snapped toward the pressure readings. The west gate numbers jumped suddenly. Too suddenly. No, I whispered. I ran back toward the catwalk railing overlooking the trench below. Water exploded through one side of the gate assembly in violent white spray. One of the side pressure seals had cracked open. Daniel grabbed the railing beside me. How long now? I watched the water hammer against the steel supports below us. Calculating. Listening. Feeling the vibration under my boots. 10 minutes, I said. Maybe less. Then the office monitor behind us displayed a new message across the screen. Authorization request accepted. Final board confirmation pending. Richard was already upstairs. The monitor glow reflected across the wet catwalk railings. Authorization request accepted. Final board confirmation pending. The word sat there like a loaded weapon. Daniel stared at the screen with his jaw tight. He already pushed it through legal review. Not fully, I said. The board still has to approve emergency transfer. Daniel looked toward the flooding chamber below us. And if the marina fails first? I did not answer. I did not need to. Another violent burst of seawater exploded against the cracked pressure seal below. The entire catwalk shuddered under our feet. A deep mechanical groan rolled through the chamber walls. Then came the sound I had been dreading. One of the backup pumps shut down completely. Silence from pump 3. Followed by warning alarms screaming louder than before. The water flow surged instantly. Daniel grabbed the railing hard. Tell me there is another way. I moved fast back into the maintenance office. Old manuals covered one side shelf. Emergency maps hung crooked beside the breaker panel. My eyes locked onto the original marina blueprint pinned beneath cracked plastic. There. The old overflow diversion line. Most people thought it had been retired years ago. It had not. The city forced Bay Ridge Point to keep it operational after the hurricane season lawsuits. There is one option, I said. Daniel stepped closer. What kind of option? I traced the faded blue line across the map with one finger. A manual diversion gate under the East Service Tunnel. His face changed immediately. Manual? It bypasses pressure from the west chamber directly into the overflow canal. Then why are we not already doing that? I looked at him. Because the will has to be opened on site. Daniel understood a second later. In the tunnel. I nodded once. During a storm surge. Water crashed below us again. Harder this time. The warning lights spun faster now, painting the walls in frantic red circles. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. How far? About 600 feet through the east utility corridor. Flooded? Partially. His expensive shoes suddenly looked very out of place down there. Mine did not. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the office wall and clipped it onto my belt. The beam flickered once before stabilizing. Weak battery. Good enough. Daniel watched me carefully now. Different than before. Not like maintenance staff. Not like background noise. Like somebody carrying the only map out of a fire. How? Do you know all this? He asked quietly. I opened the lower utility drawer beneath the desk. Inside sat stacks of handwritten maintenance logs. My logs. Years of them. Every valve. Every pipe vibration. Every broken relay. Every leak residents upstairs never saw. Because nobody else bothered learning the system, I said. Daniel lowered his eyes for a second. Shame flickered there. Real shame. Then his phone buzzed weakly in his pocket. One bar of signal finally appeared. He checked the screen and went pale. The board vote starts in 8 minutes. My head snapped toward him. Already? Richard moved it up during evacuation. Of course he did. Panic made people sign anything. Especially wealthy people protecting million-dollar condos from floodwater. Another loud crack echoed through the chamber below us. One of the support lights burst in a spray of sparks. Darkness swallowed half the room instantly. The remaining emergency lights flickered orange through drifting steam. Then I heard something else. Faint at first. Footsteps. Fast footsteps moving along the lower corridor outside the chamber. Daniel heard them too. We both froze. The flashlight beam shook slightly against the wall. Somebody was running through the utility level. Not toward the exits. Toward us. The footsteps stopped just outside the office door. Silence pressed against the room. Water roared below the catwalk. My hand tightened around the flashlight. Then a voice came through the darkness. Maya. Female voice. Breathless. Familiar. Mrs. Porter stepped into the doorway wearing a soaked maintenance jacket and carrying a ring of utility keys. Her gray curls clung wet against her forehead. You two need to move now, she said. Richard locked down the east tunnel 5 minutes ago. Mrs. Porter slammed the office door shut behind her. Rainwater dripped from the hem of her maintenance jacket onto the steel floor. Her chest rose hard with each breath. The ring of utility keys in her hand rattled sharply. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. How did you even get down here? She pushed wet gray curls from her forehead. Service tunnel from Tower 2. Her voice shook slightly. Not from fear. From anger. Richard locked the east gate 10 minutes ago and told security nobody enters the overflow corridor without board authorization. I looked at her carefully. How did you know where we were? Because I trained you, she snapped softly. And because you always come to the system before the paperwork. Another violent shudder rolled through the pump chamber beneath us. The catwalk lights dimmed hard again. One bulb burst overhead with a sharp pop. Darkness swallowed half the office for a second. Mrs. Porter looked toward the flooding chamber and her expression changed instantly. Lord! She moved closer to the railing and looked down at the cracked pressure seal below. Water hammered through the gap in thick white bursts now. That seal is going. We know, Daniel said quietly. Mrs. Porter turned toward him. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then why are you still standing here? Good question. Nobody answered it immediately. The chamber alarms screamed louder again. My flashlight beam trembled faintly across the office wall. The whole building felt unstable now. Like a ship taking on water. Mrs. Porter stepped toward the maintenance desk and saw the authorization screen still glowing on the monitor. Harbor Atlantic Development. Temporary Coastal Infrastructure Control. Her mouth tightened instantly. I knew it. Daniel looked at her sharply. You knew. She crossed her arms. I knew Richard was meeting with Harbor Atlantic people after hours for weeks. Why did you not report it? Mrs. Porter laughed once. Bitter laugh. Small laugh. To who? Silence filled the office. Heavy silence. The kind rich buildings are built on. She pointed at the monitor. People upstairs care more about property values than truth. Another crack echoed below us. Louder this time. The west pressure gauge needle slammed against maximum red. I looked toward the chamber. We are out of time. Mrs. Porter nodded once. Fast. Practical. Then listen carefully. She held up the ring of keys. Richard locked the east tunnel electronically. But he forgot the old mechanical bypass. My eyes narrowed immediately. The maintenance crawl access. Exactly. Daniel looked between us. What crawl? Access. Mrs. Porter moved toward the far wall and grabbed a faded emergency map hanging beside the filing cabinet. Her finger tapped a narrow maintenance route beneath the east overflow line. There is an old service crawlspace under the utility trench. About 4 feet high. Concrete all the way through. Daniel stared at the map. That was never on the public blueprints. Because rich residents do not like seeing infrastructure, Mrs. Porter muttered. Water roared beneath the catwalk again. A deep metallic groan rolled through the chamber supports. Then another pump shut down. Silence from pump 2. The remaining system strained instantly. The building lights flickered weakly above us. How long through the crawlspace? I asked. Mrs. Porter looked at the map. 7 minutes if the lower path is not flooded. Daniel exhaled sharply. And if it is? She looked directly at him. Then pray. Nobody smiled. The emergency monitor suddenly flashed a new alert across the screen. Board session active. Final emergency vote in progress. Richard was doing it now. Upstairs. While residents evacuated. While the marina flooded. While we stood underground trying to keep the entire system alive with rusted valves and backup keys. Mrs. Porter shoved the heavy ring of keys into my hand. Cold metal slapped against my wet palm. The crawl access is beneath the north trench ladder, she said. Take the blue key for the inner hatch. I clipped the flashlight tighter against my belt. Daniel loosened his soaked tie completely this time and rolled his sleeves higher. Mrs. Porter looked at him for a long second. You sure about this? Daniel glanced once toward the authorization screen glowing behind us. Then toward the failing chamber below. No, he admitted softly. But Maya is. The catwalk trembled again beneath our feet. Then came a sound none of us wanted to hear. The west gate support bolts began to snap. The sound of snapping bolts echoed through the chamber like gunshots underwater. One after another. Sharp. Metallic. Final. The entire west gate assembly shuddered violently below us. Water burst through the cracked seal in a thick white stream. Daniel grabbed the catwalk. Railing hard enough for his knuckles to pale. Mrs. Porter looked straight at me. Go now. I did not hesitate. I sprinted toward the north trench ladder with the flashlight bouncing hard against my hip. Daniel followed close behind. The steel stairs rattled beneath our weight as we descended. Hot air mixed with cold seawater in thick waves around us. Every breath tasted like rust and oil. Behind us, Mrs. Porter hurried toward the control panel overlooking the pumps. "I will hold the pressure readings as long as I can," she shouted. "Do not make me regret it." Another violent groan rolled through the chamber. The lights flickered again. Half the room vanished into shadow. I reached the trench ladder first and dropped onto the narrow maintenance platform below. Water surged beneath the steel grates just inches under my boots. The flashlight beam cut through drifting steam and darkness. There. Small steel hatch near the concrete wall. Almost invisible behind old piping. Daniel landed beside me awkwardly. His dress shoes splashed into freezing water immediately. "This was hidden on purpose," he muttered. "Everything important usually is." I jammed the blue key into the rusted hatch lock. For one terrible second it refused to turn. Then the mechanism cracked loose with a loud metallic snap. Cold air rushed out from the crawlspace beyond. Damp concrete smell. Stagnant water. Dust. I pulled the hatch open. Darkness swallowed the narrow tunnel ahead. Only 4 feet high. Barely enough room to crouch. Daniel stared inside with visible dread. People actually crawl through that? Not people upstairs. I climbed in first. Concrete scraped against my knees immediately. The flashlight beam bounced across old pipes running along the low ceiling. Water dripped steadily somewhere deeper ahead. The tunnel air felt colder than the chamber. Heavy. Tight. Daniel crawled in behind me and pulled the hatch shut. Darkness pressed close instantly. The sounds outside became muffled. Distant alarms. Deep vibrations. Water hammering through steel. We moved forward slowly through the narrow passage. My flashlight beam revealed faded warning labels along the walls. City overflow access. Emergency use only. Dust coated most of them untouched for years. Tiny puddles spread across the concrete floor. Then the tunnel dipped slightly downward. My stomach tightened. Water collected thicker there. How much farther? Daniel asked quietly behind me. 300 feet maybe. His breathing sounded heavier now. The crawlspace forced every sound close. Every movement. Every scrape of fabric against concrete. Then my flashlight hit something unexpected ahead. Fresh mud. Fresh shoe marks. I stopped crawling immediately. Daniel nearly bumped into me. What happened? I aimed the beam lower. Expensive tread pattern. Same as the catwalk footprints. Somebody else had already used the crawlspace. Recently. Water dripped steadily from overhead pipes. Tiny sounds. Tiny echoes. But underneath them came something else. Faint metallic movement somewhere farther ahead. Daniel heard it too. Tell me that is water. I stayed still for 2 seconds. Listening carefully. No. Not water. Tools. Somebody working metal against metal. My pulse slowed again. Focus sharpened. Keep moving, I whispered. We crawled faster now. The tunnel narrowed further around us. Concrete scraped my shoulders. The flashlight beam shook across old utility markings painted red along the walls. Then the passage opened slightly near a lower service junction. I finally saw the east overflow wheel ahead through the darkness. Huge rusted steel valve mounted beside the canal pipe. But somebody was already standing beside it. White shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. Silver flashlight in one hand. Richard Calloway turned slowly toward us inside the cramped tunnel. He did not look surprised at all. Water thundered somewhere beyond the walls. Richard lowered his flashlight slightly and smiled without warmth. You really should have stayed upstairs, Maya. The crawlspace suddenly felt even smaller. Richard blocked half the tunnel beside the massive overflow wheel. His white shirt sleeves were streaked with grease and dirty water now. Expensive clothes trying to survive inside working machinery. Daniel froze behind me. The flashlight beams crossed sharply against the concrete walls. Richard glanced toward Daniel first. I expected better judgment from you. Daniel did not answer. Water thundered through the hidden pipes around us. The entire tunnel vibrated beneath my knees. Richard lowered his flashlight toward the overflow well beside him. Heavy steel. Thick rust around the valve housing. Locked shut with a fresh industrial chain. New chain. New lock. Prepared ahead of time. You chained the diversion valve, I said quietly. Richard smiled faintly. Temporary precaution. Against who? His eyes shifted toward me slowly. Against panic. Another deep groan rolled through the walls. Dust drifted from the low concrete ceiling. Somewhere behind us, the failing marina gate screamed under pressure. Richard stayed calm. Too calm. That was what made him dangerous. Men like him always believed they could out-talk consequences. The board is voting right now, he said. By the time they finish, Harbor Atlantic will stabilize this entire property. By flooding it first, Daniel snapped. Richard barely looked at him. Controlled infrastructure failure is unfortunate. But survivable. The words landed cold in the tunnel air. Controlled failure. Like residents were numbers on a spreadsheet. Like flooded homes were negotiation tools. My flashlight beam settled on the fresh chain around the wheel valve again. Thick steel links. Heavy commercial lock. Richard followed my gaze. That valve stays closed. I shifted slightly closer. If the west gate blows, water hits the relay room. Temporary damage. People are still evacuating upstairs. And they will survive. Richard's voice sharpened for the first time. But Bay Ridge Point will never survive financially without redevelopment. Silence filled the crawlspace. Tight silence. Daniel stared at him in disbelief now. Genuine disbelief. Like part of him still thought rich men had limits. Richard continued before either of us spoke. Do you know what this place becomes in 5 years without outside capital? His flashlight swept briefly across the damp tunnel walls. Rust. Deferred repairs. Declining property values. Lawsuits. He looked directly at me then. You know the infrastructure better than anyone. You have seen it. I had. Corroded pipes. Aging pumps. Cheap repairs hidden behind polished marble lobbies upstairs. Bay Ridge Point looked perfect from the balconies. Underground told the truth. Another violent impact shook the tunnel walls. Louder this time. Daniel nearly lost his balance behind me. Water sprayed suddenly through a seam overhead and splashed cold across all three of us. Richard flinched slightly. Tiny reaction. But I caught it. He was scared now too. Good. The pressure was rising faster than he expected. My flashlight beam drifted lower along the chain lock. Hydraulic grade. Strong. But installed in a hurry. One side pin sat crooked inside the latch housing. Richard noticed my eyes narrowing. Do not. His tone changed completely. Harder now. No polished executive voice anymore. Real fear underneath it. I stayed still. Listening carefully. Feeling the vibrations through the concrete beneath my knees. The overflow will groan faintly under growing pressure behind the valve. The system wanted release. Daniel finally spoke again. Quiet voice this time. You were willing to risk all this for a contract. Richard looked exhausted suddenly. Older too. You think Harbor Atlantic gave me a choice? That changed the air immediately. Tiny shift. Tiny crack in the armor. Richard leaned one shoulder against the tunnel wall. Water dripped steadily from his soaked sleeve. "The HOA debt is buried under shell accounts and emergency loans," he said quietly. "This place was already collapsing before tonight." Daniel stared at him. "You hid it from the board." "I delayed panic." "You manufactured a disaster." Richard's jaw tightened. Then his eyes moved back to me again. "You still do not understand, Maya." Another loud metallic boom rolled through the tunnel. This time the lights flickered completely out for one terrifying second. In the darkness, the chain around the valve suddenly snapped tight under pressure. The lights snapped back on in harsh orange flashes. The chain around the overflow valve groaned again. Louder now. Steel links pulled tight under the growing pressure behind the gate. Water sprayed through tiny seams around the housing in sharp bursts. Richard looked. At the chain. Then at me. His calm was fading fast. "If that valve opens too quickly," he said, "the East Canal floods." "Better than the relay room flooding," Daniel shot back. Richard ignored him completely. His eyes stayed fixed on me. Like he already knew I was calculating the pressure load in my head. He was right. The east diversion could save the lower towers. But only if the release happened gradually. Too fast and the overflow canal would hammer the seawall directly. Another violent tremor shook the crawlspace. Dust drifted from the ceiling pipes. Somewhere far behind us, a warning siren began rising through the utility tunnels. Long hollow. Emergency flood breach warning. My flashlight beam flickered against the rusted wheel assembly. The old valve housing rattled harder now. The pressure had almost reached critical threshold. Daniel crouched lower beside me. "Can we control the release manually?" "Maybe. Maybe." I looked at the chain again. "Not if that lock fails first." Richard inhaled slowly through his nose. The tunnel air smelled like salt water and hot machinery now. Sweat darkened the collar of his white shirt. "You still think this is simple," he said quietly. "You think stopping one flood fixes the problem." Another metallic crack interrupted him. One side anchor bolt on the valve housing snapped loose. Water exploded through the widening seam and slammed against the tunnel wall beside us. Daniel flinched hard backward. I did not. My eyes locked onto the pressure wheel itself. Old steel. Rusted but functional. The wheel wanted to move already. The pressure behind it was forcing the mechanism open inch by inch. Richard saw it too. "Do not touch it," he warned. "If that canal overflows, Harbor Atlantic pulls out completely." Daniel stared at him. "You are still talking about contracts." Richard's face tightened sharply. "You think bankruptcy disappears because people survive tonight?" His voice echoed harshly inside the cramped tunnel. "This entire property is buried under hidden infrastructure debt. Insurance carriers already flagged us last year. The seawall repairs alone," another violent groan cut him off. The crawlspace floor shifted. Beneath our knees. Tiny cracks spread along the old concrete beside the valve housing. I looked toward the east tunnel slope behind Richard. Water was already creeping toward us through the lower channel grooves. Rising faster now. We were losing time by the second. Daniel looked at me desperately. "Maya. Just my name. Nothing else." But I heard the question inside it. What do we save first? The building? The people? The future? Richard suddenly reached toward the chain lock. "Wait." I grabbed his wrist instantly before he touched it. Not violently. Just fast. His skin felt cold. He froze in shock more than resistance. Nobody upstairs probably stopped Richard Calloway from doing anything. Ever. Water thundered behind the valve. The tunnel lights buzzed weakly overhead. I looked straight at him. "If you force that lock now," I said quietly, the will tears free completely. Richard's jaw tightened. He knew I was right. That was the worst part. He knew. Daniel watched both of us in silence. The sirens deeper inside the utility system grew louder. Then came a new sound through the tunnel behind us. Running footsteps. Multiple pairs this time. Echoing fast through the concrete passageways. Security teams. Or board members. Or both. Richard heard them too. Panic flickered across his face for the first time all night. Tiny crack. Tiny human moment. Then the emergency lights above us switched from orange to solid red. Automatic structural failure mode. The building itself had started responding. Red emergency lights washed the crawlspace in pulses like a heartbeat. The tunnel walls looked darker now. Smaller too. Water sprayed harder through the cracked valve seams and rolled cold across my knees. The running footsteps behind us grew louder every second. Richard finally pulled his wrist free from my hand. Not angry anymore. Just shaken. The flood sirens screamed through the utility system overhead. Daniel looked toward the approaching corridor. We are out of time. He was right. The pressure will trembled violently beside us now. Every few seconds the rusted spokes jerked slightly under the strain behind the gate. The chain links groaned with sharp metallic pops. One weak point left. Maybe two. Then everything would fail at once. Richard stared at the valve like a man watching his own future collapse. If Harbor Atlantic walks away, he said quietly, this property dies slowly instead. Water hammered the tunnel walls again. People survive slow, Daniel snapped. Richard looked exhausted suddenly. Truly exhausted. Years older than the polished man in the white linen jacket upstairs. You think I wanted this? He asked. Nobody answered him. Because maybe part of him had not wanted it. Maybe he only kept making smaller compromises until one night he stood underground during a storm protecting a locked floodgate while residents evacuated above him. That was how systems swallowed people. Quietly. One decision at a time. The footsteps outside the crawlspace reached the outer hatch. Flashlights flickered through the tunnel behind us. Voices echoed faintly now. Security. More than one person. Daniel lowered his voice immediately. If they see this setup, the entire board turns on Richard. Richard laughed once under his breath. Tired laugh. The board already knew enough to ask no questions. Another hard tremor shook the concrete floor. This time the pressure will spun half an inch by itself before the chain snapped tight again. My flashlight beam caught the mounting bolts around the housing. Two more had cracked loose completely. The valve assembly would not hold much longer. I wiped cold water from my eyes and made the calculation one final time. If the chain failed naturally, the East Canal would surge uncontrolled. Massive property damage. Possible seawall collapse. But if we opened the wheel manually in stages, the pressure could release gradually enough to protect the relay room and stabilize the lower towers. Dangerous. But survivable. I looked at Richard. We can still control this. His eyes lifted slowly toward me. How? We opened the wheel together. Daniel stared at me like I had gone insane. Maya, that pressure could tear the whole assembly loose. Only if it opens too fast. The outer hatch slammed open behind us. Flashlight beams cut sharply through the crawlspace darkness. Security uniforms. 3 of them. One board member behind them in a soaked raincoat. Everyone froze immediately at the sight inside the tunnel. Richard kneeling beside the chained valve. Me covered in seawater and grease beside the pressure wheel. Daniel soaked to the elbows in the middle of it all. One security guard raised his radio instinctively. Sir. Richard did not answer him. His eyes stayed locked on the trembling valve. The board member stepped forward carefully. "Richard, what the hell is happening down here?" Another explosive groan rolled through the tunnel. The pressure will jerked violently again. One chain link bent outward with a sharp metallic scream. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood at the same time. This was no longer politics. No longer contracts. The building itself was seconds from choosing for us. I reached slowly toward the wheel spokes. Cold rust pressed against my palms. Then I looked directly at Richard. "You can still help save this place." Silence filled the crawlspace. Water roared behind the walls. The red lights pulsed across Richard's face. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Then he stepped beside me and grabbed the wheel. The rusted wheel felt frozen beneath our hands. Cold steel. Wet steel. Years of salt and neglect locked inside the mechanism. Richard planted both palms against one spoke beside me. His white sleeves were soaked dark to the elbows now. Daniel crouched opposite us near the valve housing, watching the pressure gauge with wide eyes. The security guard stayed frozen near the hatch entrance. Nobody wanted to step closer. Another chain link screamed under the strain. The entire valve assembly jerked violently. "Slow," I said. "If it slips, let go immediately." Richard nodded once. Short nod. No arrogance left in it. Just concentration. Just fear. Water thundered through the hidden pipes behind the wall like an ocean trapped underground. The red emergency lights pulsed across the crawlspace in waves. "Now," I said. We pulled together. The wheel resisted hard at first. Metal grinding against metal. Then the rusted mechanism shifted 1 inch with a deep groan. Instantly the pressure gauge dropped slightly. Tiny movement. Tiny. Relief. But enough. The chain snapped tighter against the wheel housing with a violent metallic crack. Daniel flinched. "Again," I said. We pulled harder this time. My shoulders burned. Richard gritted his teeth beside me. The wheel moved another inch. Then another. Water exploded through the east diversion pipes behind the wall. Loud. Fast. But controlled. The crawlspace shook violently for 2 seconds. Then steadied slightly. Daniel looked toward the pressure gauge. "It is working." Nobody celebrated. The system was still screaming around us. But the catastrophic pressure spike had finally started dropping. One security guard stepped closer carefully. "Sir, the board is asking for you upstairs." Richard did not even look at him. He kept both hands on the wheel. "They can wait." That surprised everyone. Especially Daniel. The board member near the hatch lowered his flashlight slowly. His soaked raincoat dripped onto the concrete floor beside him. "Richard," he said quietly, "did you really authorize Harbor Atlantic during an active storm?" Richard stayed silent for a long moment. The wheel groaned again under our grip. Another controlled release blasted through the diversion pipes. Then he answered without looking up. "Yes." The honesty hit the tunnel harder than shouting would have. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted him. "The debt was already breaking us," Richard continued quietly. "I thought controlled redevelopment would save the property before residents discovered how bad the infrastructure had become." Daniel stared at him. "So you buried the truth?" Richard nodded once. Small movement. Heavy movement. And then I kept burying it deeper. Water rushed violently beneath the crawlspace floor. But the sound had changed now. Lower. More balanced. The pressure release was stabilizing the system exactly as I hoped. Another emergency tone echoed faintly through the tunnel speakers overhead. Different tone this time. Structural pressure reducing. The building had noticed too. I adjusted my grip on the wheel slowly. Hold it there, I said. Richard obeyed immediately. That still felt strange. The man who embarrassed me in the marble lobby upstairs was now kneeling in dirty floodwater, taking instructions from the maintenance worker he barely saw hours earlier. Daniel looked between both of us quietly. Something inside him had shifted too. Maybe inside all of them. The board member stepped closer to the monitor panel mounted beside the crawlspace hatch. His flashlight beam passed across the emergency authorization status still blinking active on the screen. Harbor Atlantic Development. Final confirmation pending. He looked back toward Richard carefully. This transfer dies tonight. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Not arguing. Not defending himself anymore. Just tired. Deeply tired. The crawlspace lights finally shifted from red back to orange. Warning level downgraded. Around us, the violent shaking inside the walls began slowing little by little. The building was surviving. Barely. Water still dripped steadily from the cracked pipes overhead. My knees ached against the concrete floor. My hands burned from the rusted wheel. But the pressure gauge continued falling. Safe numbers now. Almost safe. Then Daniel suddenly looked toward the tunnel behind us again. Wait, he said softly. Listen. The entire marina had gone quiet. The silence felt unreal after hours of alarms and grinding steel. No violent shaking. No screaming pumps. Only the distant sound of rain above the marina and water moving steadily through the diversion canal. Everyone in the crawlspace stayed still for a moment. Listening. Breathing. The pressure gauge beside the valve dropped one final inch into the safe zone. Daniel let out a slow breath like his lungs had forgotten how to work. One of the security guards lowered his flashlight completely. Another wiped water from his face with trembling fingers. Richard still held the wheel beside me. His shoulders sagged now. Exhaustion finally replacing adrenaline. I slowly released my grip from the rusted spokes. The metal left dark stains across my palms. Richard looked down at his own hands too. Grease. Rust. Dirty water soaking the sleeves of a jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Funny thing was, none of it mattered underground. Pipes did not care about status. Floodwater did not care about power. The board member near the hatch stared at the stabilized monitor readings. The relay room held, he whispered. Daniel nodded quietly. And the lower towers are dry. Nobody spoke after that. The crawlspace lights hummed softly overhead. Orange now instead of red. Calm instead of panic. Richard finally stepped away from the wheel. Slow movement. Heavy movement. He looked older than he had upstairs in the marble lobby. Older than he had an hour ago. Harbor Atlantic is finished here, the board member said firmly. Richard gave a small nod. No argument. No excuses. Just acceptance. One security guard shifted awkwardly beside the hatch entrance. Sir, he asked carefully, what do we tell residents? Richard looked toward the tunnel floor for a second before answering. The truth. That surprised everyone again. Especially me. He turned toward Daniel next. Terminate the emergency transfer immediately. Daniel stared at him a moment. Then nodded once. I already started the cancellation upstairs. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Rain echoed faintly through the distant marina pipes overhead. Good. The board member looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not through me. Not around me. You saved this entire property tonight. I wiped rust and water from my hands against my soaked maintenance jacket. The system was still salvageable. Only because you knew it better than anyone else. I did not answer that. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because hearing it out loud felt strange after years of being invisible inside the same building. Daniel climbed slowly toward the crawlspace hatch and offered me a hand up behind him. I hesitated for half a second before taking it. His grip was steady. Respectful. No pity inside it. Above us, the utility corridors felt quieter now too. The flood sirens had finally stopped. Emergency crews moved through the hallways checking valves and electrical rooms. Mrs. Porter waited near the upper chamber entrance wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. The second she saw me, her shoulders loosened with relief. "You stubborn child," she muttered softly. I almost smiled. Almost. Richard emerged from the crawlspace last. Wet shoes. Ruined jacket. Silence around him. The security guards moved aside automatically, but something had changed in the space between all of them. Power looked different after people watched you kneel beside a failing floodgate. We walked back toward the lobby together through the long concrete corridors beneath Bay Ridge Point. The building lights had stabilized overhead. Warm reflections shimmered against the wet floors now. Upstairs, the marble lobby smelled like rain and fresh coffee again. The spill from earlier was gone. Completely cleaned. Richard stopped near the elevator doors and looked toward me carefully. The entire lobby stayed quiet waiting for him to speak. His voice came lower this time. Human this time. "I should have listened to you from the beginning." The elevator doors opened softly behind us. Nobody moved right away.